Airbyte is a tool for moving data from a source to a destination. And if you're watching this video, you probably face a number of issues while trying to install the open source version of Airbyte on your system. This video is mostly going to go through the problems I faced while installing Airbyte, from installation to running my first stream of data from the source to destination. We are going to start from the very beginning, which is the installation. So I use an AMD Ryzen 5 Pro and I have 16 gig of RAM on my system. To install Airbyte, you are required to install Docker Desktop. Installing Docker Desktop also requires you install Windows subsystem for Linux if you're using Windows. After installing Docker, you now head up to installing abctl, which is Airbyte's command line tool for managing and installing Airbyte. After installing abctl on your system, you check if it's installed, and you immediately run abctl local install. This installs Airbyte and all its dependencies on your system. So while installing Airbyte on your system, one of the things you have to do is to check your Docker desktop. So if you head over to your Docker desktop and you go over to settings, you want to ensure that this is selected. Use the WSL2 based engine, and down at resources you want to ensure that this is also enabled and Ubuntu is also enabled on your system. So when you're installing WSL, you're most likely going to install the Ubuntu version, and this is what it will use over here when running Kubernetes and Airbyte under the hood. So I'm not much of a technical person, but these are all the challenges I faced while installing Airbyte, while trying to get Airbyte installed on my system. So if you're going past the installation phase, you can check if Airbyte is running on your system already. You can check it using the localhost 800 ports, and you run abctl local credentials to get your password to log into your Airbyte environment. After successfully installing Airbyte on your system, the next thing you might want to do is to create your first connection. And the most common connections to test it out first would be Postgres to BigQuery. So if you head over to create your connection, you start with creating a source. The source is where you're taking the data from, and the destination is where you're carrying the data to. And you want to search for Postgres. When you click to create your Postgres source, this is what you see. So you see the list of things you're supposed to input and a setup guide to help you setting up your source. Now, the setup guide here can get very complicated, but what it requires here is that you should ensure you have your Postgres database set up where your data will be coming from, and then you create a source here. If you follow a guide on setting up this source, say from YouTube or their website, the problem with the guides there is it requires you put in localhost here, and if you put in localhost here, you run into errors. Now, if you put in localhost here, you most likely run into this type of error. So let me pull that up. Here's an error I was running into a number of times while putting in localhost. It will tell you configuration check failed, and here is the solution to that. So now I've set up my Postgres configuration. The source name would be Postgres. Just to test it out, I'm using localhost. Port name will be automatically filled in, which is 5432. If you have a different port name for your Postgres server, you can put in here. My database name is called Full House. Then put in your username and password, and then you can head over here and set up source. In this advanced, you can click on scan changes with user defined. If it's selected on this, you see two options: replication slots and publication slots. If you don't know what to put in here, just click on scan changes with user defined cursor, and then click on set up source. Once you click on this, it will take a while for the source to get tested and verified. Now that is done, and as you can see, we have an error message: failed to save progress due to following error. What that simply means is it cannot use localhost. So if you're following a YouTube guide on setting this up, they'll most likely use localhost. because if you check the video, it's most likely from 3 years ago or 2 years ago. It's no recent video covering the current setup. Now, what you want to do if you're facing that issue, what you want to do is you want to remove this local host altogether and go into your folder and search for your Postgres installation folder. So you go over to local disk, and it's most likely going to be in program files. If yours is installed anywhere else, please look for it and make sure you find this folder, Postgres SQL, and then you click on your installed version. Then you want to head into data. Inside data, this is the file you're looking for, pghbaconf. You want to open it. Once that's open with whatever code editor you'll be using, you could even use Notepad if you want. You would see over here you have this configuration, local or type database user address and method. Now, what you want to do here, let me remove this. So what you want to do here is you most likely have this part already set up on your system. You would want to set up a new configuration for your current environment. Now, I don't know if there might be a better way to do this, but what I noticed is it doesn't connect using this local host address, so you have to put in your own IP address in it. So you can see over here that you have the host, and this is my database name, and this is my Postgres username. So I have the database name and the Postgres username, and I have my IPv4 address here, then /32 and scram SHA256. So to check for your IP address, just open your command line and then search for ipconfig. Okay, and then over here you want to copy this 1.2.6. You want to copy this address and go over here and then go back here and paste it inside here. So right now you can see I have 192.125, which is this first one over here. Now, sometimes if you're connected to another Wi-Fi network, your IP address might change. And once it changes, you have to set up the IP address inside here. So I've set up like 3 different IP addresses here that work in different Wi-Fi connection. So you want to have this set up, and currently mine is on 0.1292. So I'm going to copy this also. So you can just pause the video and copy this into this config file and set it up. So you put in your database name and your user here, then you put in the IP address here, then /32 and then scram. Once that is saved on your system, you can now head back over to Airbyte and then paste the IP address here. So this is what you're going to be using as your host name, and then you can scroll down and set up source once again. Now that is done, hopefully you should have the connection set up and your source working properly. So the next is you most likely want to set up a connection, and then you can set up your connection, connect to a BigQuery, connect a BigQuery destination. I already have a destination here set up prior to that. Setting up BigQuery is also very easy and straightforward since it's a cloud provider and not on your local PC. Once you've set up your connection, the next thing you might want to do is to ingest data from your Postgres to BigQuery, and that is where you might face your next issue. Depending on the volume of data you're transferring or streaming, you might run into numerous issues while running Airbyte locally on your system. And this is a connection I set up that is already successful by the way. And as you can see in this connection, I loaded about 1,000,000 rows of data, and while loading this data, Docker kept on crashing, right? So if you're loading data from the source to destination and Docker keeps on crashing, it just goes blank. So I get issues, I get errors like this. After a while, it takes a very long time. It's first time it took hours, and I kept on seeing it was still trying to load, but time was going over and over. So if it takes a very long time, you just know your system Docker has crashed, and not Docker didn't crash, but likely it has shut down the Kubernetes cluster or something behind the scenes. Once I checked the status of the Airbyte environment, I could see that it's unable to connect, so it's no longer connected again to Docker, right? I just kept on having this issue and numerous issues while trying to run data from the source destination. Over here, you can see your UI just keeps on crashing, right? So these were the issues I faced when trying to make that transfer for the first time. And after a long time searching about for the solutions, here's the solution I used in solving mine. Once you head over to Docker, you will check over here and you see container memory usage. Now, this is where it's very important that your RAM is about 16 gig or so. So if your allocated memory usage to Docker is 8 gig, which mine was about 8 gig for that time, you're going to burn up through that allocated memory quickly, and then Docker is going to shut down the Kubernetes cluster, and your Airbyte transfer will halt. So that was a major issue I was having while trying to transfer data. Now, if you want to solve that issue, you have to go back to your WSL Windows subsystem for Linux and make a very quick configuration or tweak. So check for WSL settings and you should see this WSL settings. You open it. Once it is opened, you see your processor count, memory size, swap size, and file location. So for this processor count, my PC specification has about 12 logical processors. So if you look at these 12 logical processors over there, and if you check, mine was about, the processor count was using the whole 12 before, and I had to reduce it down to 8. And then your memory size is where you have to increase. You have to allocate as much memory size to Docker as possible. So I had to increase this down to 12 gig from my 16 gig. And then swap size, you can just reduce that down to 0, and this should work properly on your system if you've set this. So once you're done with this, you can now head back to Docker desktop and then restart Docker desktop. So once you restart Docker desktop, you should see 11 gig here, and then you should see 8 CPUs available. Once that is all set up, you can go back to your connection or your sync process, restart your whole server. So you go over to your command prompt, your Windows PowerShell, and then run this abctl local deployment restart, and your server name might be different. So if you want to know your server name, you just run after running this is my server name, Airbyte abtcl server. So if yours is different, just run the same process over there. So restart that server, and then once that is set up, then you can now head back over to your connection and then run your connection over again. So guys, thank you very much. This video just covered all the issues and problems I faced while trying to get Airbyte to work on my system, and it might be different from what you're facing, but hopefully if this video helped you in any way, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. And in my future videos, I'll be going deeper into working with Airbyte and other analytics engineering tools. So thank you very much.